Stupidity, which is an enticing title, which is probably why the room is so full.
Oh, it wasn't for me.
So it's exciting today because both Rutuli and Ali, it's their first time really being on the spotlight in the seminar. So we're really looking forward to a great engagement from everyone for today. So the process is similar, is the same as always.
Mm-hmm.
You have about 10 or so minutes to kind of lay out your arguments, and then we'll head over to you, Rutuli, to kind of discuss. And then we will open up for about 3 questions first round, and then Ali will have a chance to respond. All right.
Can I take it away? Cool. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, thank you to Nwando and the seminar team, Hindi. I think Bianca is also involved, I'm not too sure. Geraldine, sorry, Geraldine. I'm not familiar how things have changed. And thank you to the CHR and the History Department for hosting me this afternoon. It's been lovely to return to UWC, the place after being exiled for 3 years, or exiled from UWC for 3 years. It's great to see everyone in the space, and it's lovely to return to where it all began. I think it was like March 7th, 2017. I stood there at the back and I was watching this, like, all these white people there in the front, and so I was like, oh, this is where UWC hides their white people. And it was Moritz responding to Nigel Gibson when he started off by saying that he wrote his response as a love letter. I don't intend to be that ambitious today, but I would like to point out that's where it all started, to take on this journey and trajectory from watching the way Moritz responded, for seeing how the room handled itself, how people asked questions and were generous and thoughtful with the way they read the paper and actually read the paper. So the paper is taken as read, and it's obviously, as the one that said, titled The Problem of Stupidity. So presently 3 versions of this paper exists. There's the one that everyone here has read. There's the unpack version, which is slightly shorter, and that was circulated quite widely. And then there's the version in front of me, which is this kind of presentation. The article has also received a change in title by the Cape Times when it was published, and which kind of means the editor didn't read the article. He titled it Trump AfriForum on the Problem of Stupidity, which led many people to think I was calling them stupid, which I want to clarify was not the case. But if they took it as an offense, that's their problem. Yeah, I've also received, beyond looking forward to Rutuli's response today, I've received responses to the paper from conservative commentators from AfriForum directly, which made my day. Generally, I even phoned my grandmother and I was like, yo, do you know what Nani happened today? So maybe at the end we can consider some of those responses, because I think it's very important in understanding their response as a working concept or as a working moment of the operationalization of this problem of stupidity that I raise, or stupidity in practice. So I think the white Afrikaners have taken enough space in the room, so let's turn to why we're all here, the paper. So to begin, it's a curious paradox of our moment that although we live immersed in an ocean of information, our collective capacity to think deeply seems to be eroding. Bernard Stiegler argues that we have developed what he calls a pharmacology of stupidity, taking from the Greek word pharmakon, meaning the poison and the cure, in which the constant stimulus of algorithms and the lure of instant gratification gradually dull our power of reflection. We're surrounded by facts, yet context slips through our fingers, leaving us stranded in a state of conditioned paralysis rather than critical inquiry. Stupidity, this isn't mere ignorance. It's a structural condition, a looming pathology, if you will. Deleuze reminds us that history does not repeat itself in neat cycles, but reappears as mutation. Mutation that is sculpted by new forces. The authoritarianisms of today bear the scars of globalized finance, digital media, and widespread skepticism towards expertise. We recognize the familiar patterns of scapegoating and populist resentment, but they have been recast into viral memes, to quote the 2016 Trump administration, alternative facts, and the work of troll farms that we've all become far too familiar with. The past is not a dusty mirror, but a living, shifting presence. This systemic perspective compels us to distinguish between individual error and collective stupidity. Stiegler's point is that when technical rationality becomes our default mode, when algorithmic feeds and instant gratification govern our attention. Reason itself is bypassed and we descend into what Deleuze calls the repetition of history with difference. Into this milieu strides stupidity as an apolitical strategy. Vital Ronaldo describes it as a violent and proud stupidity that cloaks itself in a language of expertise. And as Adorno warned us as early as the 1940s, that cliches dressed up as technocratic precision are a powerful tool of domination. Nietzsche's own notion of ressentiment further clarifies how moral authority can be built on grievance, weaponizing a collective sense of injury into an emotional, rallying cry. In this light, stupidity transcends mere error. It becomes a performative power. We see this most vividly in the spectacle of policy. So I just want to draw our attention back to April 2nd, 2025. The US administration then unleashed a sweeping tariff package. I'm sure we're all familiar. We're all caught up into the doom scroll. The sweeping tariff package of a flat 10% levy on all imports, followed by punitive rates on Chinese goods at 34%, 20% tariffs on European Union products. What had happened was overnight, American households absorbed a hidden tax that was about $258 billion. Steel plants laid off workers and farmers reeled from retaliatory duties, which is a stark contrast to the Trump campaign rallies. So the people he was supposed to claim to represent and support, he effectively wrong. But this moment was hailed as an act of strength. The emotional high of sticking into China outweighed any sober calculation of long-term prosperity. This is popular stupidity, a policy theater designed to gratify the base while inflicting real economic pain. And that economic pain is not just felt by the American working class, but the globe as it stands. Today's authoritarians do not simply reenact the 1930s. And I want to draw attention to Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I think the movie came out last year in November, December. And Bonhoeffer, during the 1930s, 40s, and the Nazi rule, had theorized his theories of stupidity, which is particularly important to this paper. I neglected to include it, and I only realized it after I put it out there. So when furthering this paper, I hope to include his work. So this is why stupidity must be understood as performance. We must bear the 1930s in mind, bear the 1940s in mind, and bear this critical moment in time. So Ronald's account of violent and proud stupidity shows how cliches dressed as expertise can wield more power than sober analysis. Remember the image of the 1930s, the 1940s. And Adorno's insight, this is Adorno's direct quote, when all actions are mathematically calculated, they also take on a stupid quality, which I talk about a little bit in my master's about measurement. But if something is to be considered important, it has to be measured. And that's the point to make there. This reminds us how technocratic precision can mask barbarism. Again, to grasp why stupidity thrives politically, we must attend to Nietzsche's notion of ressentiment, and particularly must be attentive to it through Wendy Brown's reading of Wounded Attachments. When social groups feel dispossessed, as in the case of the American working class, Afri-Forum, whether by economic dislocation, cultural change, or historical reckoning, they can weaponize grievance into moral authority, simplifying complex realities to scapegoating narratives. This is the same theater of folly that extends to executive orders that decapitated the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs on day one of the new term, and it was framed as radical waste. Yet, it was implemented without alternative frameworks, leaving the entire bureaucracy confused. They didn't know what to do. It was total chaos and incoherent. Further, immigration clampdowns were heralded as defense against an invasion. Despite long-standing labor needs and humanitarian obligations, environmental rollbacks, the Paris Agreement withdrawal, expanding of drilling or oil drilling. So there's photo-op rhetoric more than long-term policy. In Orwell's language, such newspeak does more than obscure the truth. It remakes reality, privileging spectacle over substance. But as Deleuze warns, repetition is never identical. The current surge of the right-wing movements, from Orban's illiberal democracy to Maloney's invocation of God, homeland, and family, to Modi's Hindu majoritarianism, and Bolsonaro's nostalgia for military rule, draws on shared tactics. And these are fear-mongering, media manipulation, transnational funding, and they are all adapted to local contexts. We're seeing it play out with solidarity in AfriForum. They project sovereignty against global elites, even as they erode the very multilateral institutions, the European Union, the World Trade Organization, the UN, that once bound them. This is what I call a conservative imperialism, an empire of ideas and influence, not conquest. Not conquest in the traditional way that we understand it. So the debate of the toy. I forget the year, but it was a long time ago. But united by the inversion of liberal norms into majoritarian domination. They cast themselves as underdogs defending sovereignty against the shadowy globalist elite, all while chipping away at the very institutions, again, the WTO, the UN, the EU, that once underpinned their country's stability. It is a self-sabotage in politics, masquerading as liberation, a conservative imperialism that projects power internationally, even as it undermines the multilateral frameworks that could check its excesses. Now, let's turn to home. AfriForum's narrative of white Afrikaner victimhood offers a vivid South African vignette. Under the leadership of CEO Kali Kriel and spokesperson Ernest Ruitz, the organization portrays land reform, affirmative action, and crime as signs of a looming white genocide. And this is where it gets kind of funny, right? Their March 2025 lobbying tour to Washington featured carefully staged photo ops in congressional corridors, meeting in reality with marginal figures. But was trumped as a diplomatic triumph. I read this as a moment of like, oh shucks, AfriForum goes to Washington. Mm-hmm. They were just there chilling. They were on holiday, and they took pictures, and all I got was a T-shirt. So that was about it. This kind of moment it was a cherry picking of they kind of MO is a cherry picking of data on rare attacks against white farmers and ignoring the far more widespread violence affecting black farmers, black farm workers, and rural communities. They amplify anxiety and feed into this global conservative echo chamber where figures like Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson amplify their claims. This is the danger. The result is a flipped victim-perpetrator narrative. Cultural protections for Afrikaans becomes reverse discrimination, and constitutional safeguards read as a proof of systemic oppression. It's a Don Quixote with a lobby budget. A profound sense of displacement funneled into ethnic grievance rather than collective nation building. We must acknowledge that these anxieties are not wholly manufactured. Crime, job competition, and cultural transition stir genuine unease. The tragedy lies in how these legitimate concerns are harnessed by those who simplify fear into constructed identity. To counter this, we must first expose the emotional calculus, asking always who benefits, which fears are stoked, and how these facts are weaponized. We need to address the real economic and social security concerns so scapegoating loses its appeal. We must cultivate spaces for genuine deliberation, media literacy campaigns, civic education, and forums that embrace complexity rather than retreat to slogans. Finally, we need narratives of solidarity that emphasize interdependence over isolation, pluralism over purity, and evidence over spectacle. Stupidity, as we have seen, is not an intractable plague, but deliberate political strategy, one we can resist by marshalling theory, evidence, and collective action. As the 21st century unfolds, our task is to transform the pharmacon of digital distraction into a cure, to reclaim reflection as our shield and our sword in the ongoing struggle for democratic life. By naming its forms, from tariff theater in the United States to grievance networks across the continent, and the perfidious rhetoric of local lobby groups, we arm ourselves with the intellectual tools to demand better of our leaders, our media, and ourselves. In that struggle, critical thought remains both our shield and our sword again. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you.
So,